Hey guys, well, welcome back to Wednesday Wisdom. I'm Thrisha Martin with TEM Realty with Maximum One Realty and Johns Creek Mortgage, and I'm always taking you from home loans to house keys. So today we're going to talk about what actually happens after you go under contract, because this is where a lot of people start to panic. So, okay, congratulations, you're under contract. What's next? So usually the first week is pretty busy. Depending on your contract timeframes, there's a lot of stuff that happens. And remember that everything that I'm about to tell you is negotiable in your contract, and every contract is different. So I'm just going to tell you what's typical for me. So usually earnest money is about 1% of the contract price, and I usually do a time frame of about 3 days. This is the deposit, and it's protected by your dates, such as due diligence, appraisal, and finance. And I'll do a more in-depth conversation about earnest money in a later episode. The next thing is due diligence. It's defined in the contract, and in Georgia, it's where you can walk away from the contract for any reason. Just change your mind. The next thing is inspections, and that is usually during the due diligence period. The buyer pays for this, and it's not reimbursed if you cancel the contract. It's usually somewhere between $500 and $600 or more, depending on the size of the house. Negotiations about concerns found on the inspection happen during the due diligence period. This can be a reduction in price, a seller contribution to closing, or sellers completing repairs. This is where most contracts fall through. It must be agreed upon before the end of due diligence. And then also during this time, the loan processing begins. It's already working in the background, but now the focus shifts. This is a busy week, but it is structured. So then you get to the loan process. Once you get through due diligence, and sometimes during due diligence, depending on how fast your closing is, your loan officer is going to order your appraisal. It's usually paid for outside of the closing by the buyer. If the contract falls through, this is not reimbursed to the buyer. If the contract closes, it's credited to the buyer at closing. You have underwriting review, and this is where it helps to have an LO and a processor that gets as much possible up front to cut down on other items needed later. Then you'll get what we call conditional approval. This is where the loan officers and the processors start asking for more paperwork. It is very normal for some paperwork that is submitted to the underwriter generating items that need to be asked for later. Believe me, we all wish we knew exactly what underwriters were thinking, but they're going through with a fine-tooth comb. The final approval, we may not be quite clear to close yet, but we're probably just waiting on something from the attorney or verification of some document. This is where the communication matters the most. Underwriters are not scary. They just like paperwork, and they're protecting the investor and following a lot of guidelines. So then next, yay, you're clear to close. So once we're clear to close, you get your final numbers confirmed. This is where we balance with the lender with the closing attorney. The closing disclosures are issued, and the closing disclosure must be signed 3 business days prior to closing. Funds are wired to the closing attorney for closing, and it's best to do that 24 hours prior to closing if possible. But usually it can be done in the same day, as long as you have a bank that doesn't do batch. We'll talk about that later. The keys are handed over at closing, and it's simple, structured, and predictable. So what makes it smooth? A smooth closing happens when clients submit documents quickly, expectations are set early, and everyone trusts the plan. That's it. On a side note, let's talk about dates for a minute, because this is where people get confused. In Georgia, a real estate contract, unless something specifically says business days, most deadlines are counted as calendar days, and they end at 11:59 p.m. on that final day. So for example, if your due diligence period is 5 days from the binding agreement date, and it's March 25th, we don't count that day. March 26th becomes day 1. And that means that your due diligence would end at 11:59 p.m. on March 30th. Now, business days are different, and those typically exclude weekends and federal holidays. And certain federal lending rules, like TRID, have their own definitions. That's why it's so important to work with an agent and a lender who truly understand how dates are calculated. Deadlines affect your earnest money, your contingencies, and leverage in the contract. And dates aren't just paperwork, they're protection. So finally, If you've made it through all 4 of these Wednesday Wisdom episodes, you now understand more about the buying process than most people on the internet. If you want guidance from someone who values education, communication, and a clear plan, I'd love to help. Subscribe weekly for more education, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Again, I'm Thrisha Martin with TEM Realty, backed by Maximum One Realty and Johns Creek Mortgage, and I hope to see you soon. Have a great week.